Aberration, lazy goods, morally wrong. These are just some of the words that have been used to describe home workers or remote workers by the world's leading businessmen. Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan says remote working doesn't work for young workers, for managers, for spontaneity, or even hustlers, saying that they should really experience negative career outcomes. Some people say the biggest barrier to productivity when working from home is cheese. So this is Boris Johnson, the previous Prime Minister of the UK, saying how you spend an awful lot of time getting up, walking to the fridge, hacking up a small piece of cheese, walking back slowly to your laptop, and then forgetting what it was you're doing. This is called the flexibility stigma. Somehow the idea that flexible workers, including remote workers, are, well, lazy, not committed, not motivated, and therefore not productive compared to in-office workers. And therefore, they should really experience some negative career outcomes. And this is just not limited to business leaders or politicians. A recent study of Europeans found that 1 out of 3 workers thought flexible working was negatively viewed by colleagues, by managers, and that it leads to negative career outcomes. And we see a lot of these views coming back as more and more managers are asking workers to come back into the office, citing issues around productivity as well as commitment as the main reasons. But the question arises, right? Like, why do we think this way? Why do we think, for the lack of a better word, home workers are slackers? Is it based on the truth? Are they really slackers? Or is there something else going on? What I want to say today, actually, is that this is a real good reflection of some of the problematic natures of our work and gender culture. And these problems are actually some of the biggest barriers for us in trying to really use good scientific evidence-based working practices that could actually help not just workers, but also employers. So first of all, are they based on the truth? We know from a lot of evidence spanning from decades that flexible workers are actually more motivated, more loyal, and more committed to their jobs. And that's quite simple, because most of us want to work flexibly. Most of us love that freedom, autonomy, and control over your work. So of course, when we get those kind of arrangements, we are happier, we're more motivated, and we are more committed to the jobs and the employers, right? And this reduces issues around retention, and of course, eases problems with recruitment. And also, a lot of flexible workers have lower rates of sickness and absenteeism, many of which is because it increases well-being levels. And those things alone can really increase productivity, right? But add the fact that, especially for remote workers, you don't have to do the commuting or preparation to look, kind of presentable, which could take a lot of time, by the way, 3 to 4 hours a day perhaps. And then also add the fact that in the office there's a lot of distraction. So the quietness of the home can really help you increase productivity. This is why we see that surveys of managers, surveys of workers, even studies that look at really objective measures of productivity shows that flexible workers are as productive, if not more productive, than non-flexible workers. In my book, The Flexibility Paradox, I actually show how flexible workers work harder and they work longer and think about work when not at work and do work in their free time. So rather than flexible workers slacking off, we see that a lot of flexible workers have work encroaching on their private time. But then why do we think they're slackers? Why do we think home workers or flexible workers generally are lazy workers? One reason is the proximity bias. The proximity bias is that managers tend to think the workers they can see working are the productive workers. The workers I could see more often are the committed workers. Now, of course, if you're working flexible schedules or you're working from home, you're not going to be seen by the managers as much, and this is why the biases occur. Okay, but perhaps more importantly is our ideal worker culture. In many of our societies, we still have this image of the most productive, good worker as someone who is committed to work and only to work. This is a disembodied worker who was only a worker and not anything else, doesn't have family or friends or even their own body, right? So they don't have any caring responsibilities. So they could put very long hours in the office, always on, always connected, because they don't have any other needs. And this is really based on potentially the 1950s male breadwinner in a heterosexual relationship who could do all of those things because there was someone else doing the reproductive work, a female partner doing the cooking and cleaning, dishes, ironing, taking care of the children, the pets, the elderly parents, and even taking care of the male breadwinner themselves, like doing the self-care for that worker. And it's really unrealistic. It's a completely unrealistic idea that doesn't necessarily reflect the workers we have in today's society. Actually, the ideal worker is extremely exclusionary. Why? Because long hours work is incompatible with the responsibilities outside of work. So this is exclusionary for anyone with caring responsibilities, including self-care, and by that I mean workers with disabilities or long-term illnesses. Because again, long hours work and those caring demands do not necessarily are compatible with one another. What is more, it's exclusionary towards those in marginalized working positions. So we're talking ethnic minority workers, LGBT plus workers, who for many, you have to work twice as hard to get the same amount of recognition, but on the other hand, also might have to deal with a lot of emotional labor to be in a work culture that wasn't really made for them. And the expectations of long hours work could really push them over the edge. But again, more importantly, it's extremely outdated. The ideal worker norm is based on this industry-based, tailorist, machine-based kind of ideas about production, right? You put hours into a machine, and then you get output, right? But even in those days, I don't think that really worked. But these days, especially with knowledge work, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever in terms of what good productive outputs are. We know from the science, an increasing amount of science, that shorter hours can be more productive. Why? Because you're less fatigued, you could focus better, but also because you get rid of perhaps all these inefficiencies at work. What is more, we know that physical and mental detachment away from work actually can make you more productive because of the brain science. It's how we cognitively understand knowledge. So these long hours work don't allow for that, which especially on the long run can really lead to ineffectiveness. And moreover, like happy workers with good work-life balance, they are generally more productive. So again, then we think about it, like, why do we have these biases? And again, even if those of us who feel like, oh no, I don't have it, but it's really deep ingrained in us. Like, why do we think this way? And I think this is really based on the fact that we have a prejudice in our society, how if you have a good work-life balance, somewhat you're not really a committed worker. If you have caring demands, then you can't possibly also be devoted to work. And I think those prejudice and biases, I would go on to say that is actually a biases that we have against mothers. We think that mothers, once we become mothers, that you can't prioritize privileged work, that you can't be a good worker because you have other responsibilities outside of work, that your caring responsibilities are always going to somehow hinder you as being a good worker. So Sen and Wang and I gathered some data in Singapore and the UK. And what we find is that, yes, and this is post-pandemic, by the way, so after the whole lockdown and everything, when everything is normalized, like home workers are still penalized quite a bit. Unless it's normalized. If everybody works from home, then the stigmatization lessens. However, what we also find is that once home working was kind of meant for mothers, oh, it's mostly mothers working from home, oh, the policies are mostly for mothers, workers were stigmatized harder. And when we see how perhaps the stigmatization of home workers actually has to do with the fact that the home workers look too much like mothers, and that's why we start stigmatizing them. And that you can't possibly be a good worker and be a good ideal worker if you were to be a mother or worker with caring responsibilities. Now, this is a real big issue as we see more and more managers and companies demanding that workers come back into the office. And again, even those companies where all the work could easily be done at home. Men are increasingly going back into the office. On one hand, because they can, because they don't have as much caring and other household demands, but also because they're a bit afraid of the career bias or career consequences they may face if they don't go back. Now, for mothers, this isn't so easy, because for many of them, they have no other way but to work from home because of all the mother load that they are expected to carry. They might have to drop out of the labor market altogether if they were to have to go into the office 5 days a week, or just not be able to meet some of those caring demands. If we have more mothers stay at home while men and fathers return back into the office, we're going to see an exacerbation of flexibility stigma. And this isn't going to be just for mothers, but all home workers. And we're going to see it not because home workers or flexible workers are less productive or less committed or motivated, but purely based on problematic natures of our work culture and our gender culture. We might see a society where a lot of workers go back to the office, and we go back to the old ways and go work in the office, but not because it's productive or because workers want to, but because we just couldn't shake off the old images of our work and the ideal worker in the right way. But okay, I don't want to end at a gloomy note. It's not all bad. We could change this. Stronger rights for flexible working for all workers, not just mothers or parents, is a good way. Providing stronger protection is also another important thing. We also have to change the narrative of flexible working. It isn't just a gender equality policy or a work-life balance policy. It is a productive policy. It is something that we could do to really enhance productivity and meet the challenges of futures of work. We have to start tackling gender biases and changing gender roles by putting fathers into taking care of children early on in the child's life. But more importantly, we need to tackle the ideal worker norm. We have to start developing a new term or new ideas about a standard productive worker, that having good work-life balance makes you a better worker, that having good well-being makes you a productive worker, that having caring demands, being able to meet caring demands, actually makes you not only a good worker, but also a fantastic manager. Because at the end of the day, hacking off a little bit of cheese during your workday in the fridge doesn't necessarily make you a bad worker, unless you're Boris Johnson, of course. All right, thank you very much.